Sahaviryam Karavavai Tejasvinavaditamastu Mavidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May Brahman protect us, may he guide us and give us strength and right understanding. May love and harmony be with us all. Om, peace, peace, peace. And good evening, and I hope you all had a blessed Shivaratri last night, and we'll have a Ramakrishna Puja on Sunday, and the actual day is tomorrow, so if you're in Santa Barbara or San Diego areas, they will be having their pujas tomorrow, and we'll be having ours on Sunday. So you could even catch both of them if you wanted to. All right, we are reading from the complete works of Swami Ramakrishnananda, and we are in the middle of the chapter called How to Distinguish an Incarnation of God. I think I'll start back a little bit. Throughout the whole lifetime of a person, therefore, consciousness is present. Mind does not always exist. Senses do not always exist. Body does not always exist. But consciousness always exists. It is consciousness that enlivens the senses and the mind. It is consciousness which enables the senses to perceive and sense all things. Now this consciousness, which is distinct and separate from the senses and the mind, has the power not to be confined by the mind, or the senses, or the body. When it is not confined by these, it is in its liberated condition, unconditioned or unconfined. This consciousness is therefore really limitless. And we can make this out in sound sleep, for at that time it has separated itself from body and mind, and so is unconfined, infinite. It must exist inside the body. It can never be outside, for the moment it goes outside, the man drops dead. Now, consciousness, being infinite and unlimited, and being also an essential part of man, then man must be finite and infinite at the same time. He is finite as regards his body, and he is finite as regards his mind, and he is finite as regards his ego. But he is infinite as regards his consciousness. It is therefore possible for him to be finite and infinite at the same time. How much more must it be possible for God? So that was the paragraph that we read the last time. And we talked about how consciousness does seem to be able to be separate from the body and the mind, and people have that kind of experience in mystical experiences. They have that kind of experience in near-death experiences, and they have young kids that remember past lives, remember having had that experience in between lives. And it's said that some therapists are able to regress people into states in between lives and so forth, and then they can remember things that happened in between lives and so forth. Of course, that's hard to verify, but that's what people feel that they are doing. So this consciousness is really the essence, the existence, consciousness, bliss. It's that essence of Brahman itself. I can pull up a chair. Oh, good, you got a chair. Good. It always happens when we're in the library. We seem to always have more people. We're in the temple. Nobody's there in person. So, so it's that essential essence of, and of course, everything is coming from Brahman. So everything does have some essence of consciousness, but there's a definite distinction between living and non-living. There is a difference in what is pervading it. Even though Brahman is pervading the living and the non-living, there is something different about the sentiency of the living than there is from the non-living. And these are kind of a mysterious difference. It's hard for us to understand exactly how that is, since everything has come from Brahman, and yet we do have this distinction between the living and the non-living. And then, of course, we find some things that defy categorization even between the living and the non-living, such as viruses, which don't appear to be living unless they're inside another cell and making use of the mechanisms of that living cell. Life itself is one of the most mysterious processes that you can delve into trying to understand. And of course, the materialists try to figure out a way to create life. And when you look at the complexity of the living cell, you very soon realize the enormous difficulties in such a project. First of all, it's sort of a chicken and egg problem. You have to have a cell membrane in which all of these chemical processes of the cell are taking place. And then inside the cell, you have to have DNA, and then you have to have RNA in order to take the messages of the DNA in order to make the proteins. And you have to have a source of proteins in order for the RNA and DNA to do anything. And so it's, and of course the DNA and RNA are made up of ribonucleic acids and deoxyribonucleic acids. And those are rather complex molecules. They're not simple molecules. So it was almost laughable when they thought they'd made progress in the Euler-Gehrig experiment, where they put arcs of electricity through a primordial soup, and they got a few amino acids, and they felt quite, yes, right, yeah, we're creating life in a test tube. Well, that's a long way from life. Anyway, so how this all-pervading consciousness of Brahman that is in everything somehow manages to become a living organism is quite a mysterious process indeed. And now, of course, we're trying to understand the difference between our type of consciousness, and of course our consciousness is, again, not completely unique. We know that animals have a consciousness. They're not quite on the level we are in many ways, but many of them have languages, and they certainly understand things. They can puzzle things out. They can solve problems. They can remember where things are. So there's a great deal of consciousness in animals. And of course, there are fascinating experiments with plants as well that show that plants have memories and plants have emotions, and plants can communicate with each other. So there's definitely a level of consciousness in the plant kingdom as well. But we're trying to figure out now what's the difference between the human being, which seems to be roughly on the top of the animal consciousness scale, and the idea of an incarnation of God. There is a difference, however, between man and God. Man has forgotten his infinite nature. He thinks he must have a certain amount of food, of air, of heat to make him live. In his mind, he is less limited, but still, compared with infinite knowledge, the amount he can possess is infinitesimally small. Still, we must admit that he who lives in his mind has expanded himself infinitely more than he who lives solely in his body. But what is the number of the second class? At least 99% of humanity. The great majority of people believe that they are weak or strong, hungry or well-fed, ill or well. For suppose, however, there is a poet or a philosopher. What does he do? He shuts himself up in a room and becomes so lost in his thought that he forgets his body. Such a person is honored and respected by all people because they know that that person is much wiser than they are, and it is to the feet of such that we go and sit and learn. Yet again, compared to infinite knowledge, what this man knows is infinitesimally small, and the knowledge of the average man is still less. And we've probably all had that type of experience where we become so engrossed in a particular project or in a particular problem that our minds are completely absorbed, and we lose track of time, and we're not aware that the air conditioner has stopped working, or that an alarm has started to go off, or something else that normally would distract our attention has happened. And so we've all experienced that kind of one-pointedness to a certain degree, and hopefully we can occasionally glimpse that in a meditation process as well, where we can glimpse that time when we can transcend our normal plane of consciousness and feel that we have lost track of the exterior world and we are immersed in the interior world. Nearly every man imagines that he is 3.5 cubits long. I don't think I've ever imagined myself as 3.5 cubits, but anyway, I'm not exactly sure how long that is. That sounds more like, isn't a cubit about
18 inches, I think.
Oh, is a cubit 18 inches?
Something like that.
All right. Well, okay.
54
Maybe
plus
it's close.
9.
Yeah. And that at the death of the body he must die. And because he wants to live, he hates death. This is not the case, however, with one who lives more in his consciousness, and such a one is known as an incarnation of God. And it's interesting, again, that people that have had near-death experiences, the vast majority of them have no fear of death after that, because they've already glimpsed that realm and didn't feel there was anything to fear. Man identifies himself, sorry that this is all very sexistly written, but I keep trying to change it, and it's difficult because then there's another word in the same sentence that you can't change. Man identifies himself more with his body and mind. He believes himself to be finite and his consciousness limited. That is the reason why Arjuna said to Sri Krishna, "You are my age, and yet you say that you knew that which happened before I was born." And Sri Krishna replied, "Many lives have elapsed of yourself and myself, Arjuna, and you know them not, but I know them all." Because you confine your consciousness by your body and by your mind, and know few things, and you do not know about the whole of the past. You only know what has taken place in this lifetime, because you have identified yourself with this body and mind. Therefore, your extension is limited, and your life is limited. But I have identified myself with my consciousness. Therefore, my extension is unlimited, and my life is unlimited, and I can know all time. That was a quote again from the Gita. This must have been Sri Krishna's explanation of the affirmation which he made to Arjuna. So again, of course, occasionally we get glimpses of those things. You might go to a place and have a strange feeling of familiarity, even though you'd never been there. You might meet somebody and have a strange feeling of familiarity, even though you've never met them before. You find yourself attracted to certain activities or occupations or subject matter, and there's no particular explanation for why. Perhaps you suddenly, as you're growing up, you're watching TV and you see a tennis match, and all of a sudden you just have to be a tennis player. Or you see somebody playing the violin and you just suddenly have to learn how to play the violin. And again, there's just no particular explanation for that, but these are hints that there's something deep about our previous lives that pokes its head through every once in a while and expresses itself in a way that in this life we need to work out. So, and again, of course, we occasionally might experience something like that in a dream, or if you're lucky enough to run into a highly enlightened being, they might tell you something about your past life, or in your meditation you might have experienced something about your past life. But for the most part, most of us are lucky to get a glimpse of one past life or one or two past lives in a very tiny piece, whereas an incarnation knows all about all of these. The incarnation of God has the power to separate himself from body and mind consciously, and he does it from his birth. Suppose you consciously separate yourself from your shirt. Well, that is one thing. But during sleep, somebody takes it from your body. You do not know it. So, in the same way, when you are asleep, someone separates you from your body and mind. That power, which has forced you to lose your consciousness, has mastery over you, and that power is sleep. Sleep, however, never overpowers an incarnation of God. It's interesting in the Chandi, that's the power of sleep is manifest as a particular Devi, a particular aspect of the Divine Mother, and that particular aspect is the one that has to lift the sleep from Lord Vishnu so that he can battle Matu and Kaitapa in the first story. Yogindra is the name, I think. Sleep, however, never overpowers an incarnation of God. He is always wide awake. Therefore, he has mastery over his body when he is wide awake. He has mastery over his mind when he is dreaming, and he has mastery over his consciousness in sound sleep. Hence, he is always the master. He is the master of the wakeful condition, of the dream condition, and of sound sleep. He sleeps only when he wills. We often try to keep awake, but we fall asleep. Perhaps many of you experienced that in Shivaratri, trying to stay awake all night. With an incarnation of God, however, that is not the case. For that reason, he is Rishikesha, or the Lord of the senses. As in your infinite consciousness, as in your infinite consciousness is enlightening your body and your mind, so in the tiniest animalcule, that same consciousness is enlightening its body and mind. Just as there may be a very small creek filled from the big ocean, so behind all these finite consciousnesses, there is the infinite ocean of consciousness. From the highest being, Brahma, to the lowest blade of grass, all living organisms are a peculiar mixture of that which is finite and that which is infinite. In the same way, when God incarnates, he too becomes both finite and infinite. But he only appears finite. He never identifies himself with the finite. Man thinks himself finite, so his body is finite. His mind is finite, and his consciousness is finite. But because God never identifies himself with his body and mind, although he appears finite, he is really infinite. Although he appears limited in powers, he is really omnipotent. Therefore, Sri Krishna says to Arjuna, because men cannot recognize my infinite nature, they treat me like an ordinary man. But I am always infinite, although I may appear finite. When Sri Krishna said, I am all this, Arjuna asked him to show his universal form, and then he manifested his divine side. I have a couple of extra seats here, and people can come around the side. Come out of the cold. We're reading from the complete works of Swami Ramakrishnananda, who started the work in the southern part of India. We're reading his lecture on how to distinguish an incarnation of God, and we've been discussing how the difference between an incarnation of God and an ordinary person or any sentient being is that they never forget that they are infinite in consciousness, and so they are always aware of their infinite nature as well as having assumed a finite nature in order to fulfill their divine play. This, then, is the difference between an incarnation of God and the ordinary created beings of the universe. Man is always consciously finite and unconsciously infinite, while an incarnation of God is consciously infinite and finite. There are other marks which distinguish an incarnation of God from a mukta purusha. By sitting at the feet of a true teacher, by serving him, by worshiping him, the disciple realizes his perfect nature. Such are called sadhana siddhas. Then there are those who become perfect by a dream. In a dream, a man sees some great soul who gives him a mantra. When he wakes up, he remembers that mantra, and repeating it, he becomes perfect. These are called swapna siddhas. There are certain nitya siddhas who incarnate with God. Because they are, as it were, courtiers of God, companions of God, and are constantly with God, they must be perfect. And when God comes, they come with him. There is a creeper on which the fruit comes first, then the flower. Nitya siddhas are like that. They are born with wisdom, and that helps them to distinguish right from wrong, good from evil, profit from loss. Then, being able through this wisdom to know what is right, what is good, what is real profit, they begin to struggle for these, and this struggle is the flower. I think they're talking about things like squash. You know, when you see a squash, you already see the little bit of fruit before the flower flowers. But you can easily make out nitya siddhas and differentiate them from an incarnation of God, because they always sit at the feet of an incarnation and never claim to be equal to their master. An incarnation of God is always perfect. Baby Sri Krishna showed the whole universe in his mouth to his mother. Apparently he was a helpless and weak baby, but he killed the most powerful demons even in his babyhood. He was a peculiar mixture of weakness and strength, of that which is absolutely finite with that which is absolutely infinite. And of course, we are all microcosms of the macrocosm, but we don't know it. And that's our spiritual goal, is to realize that all of the elements of the macrocosm are residing within us, and that's the function of our spiritual practices. For example, a mantra has a particular vibration, and the vibration of that mantra vibrates with certain elements of that microcosmic reality, which is in tune with the macrocosmic reality. And so by repeating it, it's like having a resonant string. If there's a string and you play a tone that string will resonate with, then the string will start to vibrate. So we repeat our mantras so that vibration of purity and knowledge within us will start to vibrate and expand, and we become aware of that part of our microcosmic nature that is one with the macrocosm. And the same thing can be said of yantras. Yantras are a visual representation of that vibrational energy, and you pick up that vibrational energy by looking at the yantra. The same thing could be said of a murti. A murti is another pictorial representation of that divine energy, and that's why they have all sorts of accoutrements that they're holding, and that's why they have to have so many hands, because they have to have a lot of symbolic emblems in their hands. And so in order to do that, they have a lot of arms in order to hold them. And by looking at a Murti, or looking at a picture of a realized soul, then you pick up the vibrations of that realized soul, and that vibration of realization begins to vibrate within you. There is another thing which distinguishes an incarnation of God. An ordinary man, if he wants to learn, must go and sit at the feet of someone, but an incarnation never needs a teacher. He never has a guru. Well, that's not exactly true. We know Sri Ramakrishna had at least a couple of gurus and a couple of teachers. But of course, he takes them on in a different way, and he'll just explain that a little later. He gets all his illumination from within himself. Illumination comes to man by the cooperation of his mind, body, and external world. He analyzes the world with the help of his body and mind, weighs it in the balance of reasoning, and finds it wanting. Thus, giving up the world on account of its hollowness, he realizes truth within himself. But the incarnation of God never cares to analyze the world in this way. He never worships as others do. He comes to teach a new religion, to teach men how to worship. So, how can he comply with the manners of those around him? How can he move like them, live like them, worship like them? For that reason, people criticize and misunderstand him at first. He comes as a teacher and not as one who is taught by the ordinary methods of the world. Take our great master Sri Ramakrishna. Most men must read books. Most men must go to school. But without reading books, without going to school, he was able to know everything, while those who read books and go to school really know nothing. So he comes to teach that if a man wants to realize his infinite, all-knowing nature, he must not make such much of books, but must go within and read the book of his own inner self. Then only will he realize his perfect nature. And of course, we know that Sri Ramakrishna, in order, really, these great ones set example. They have to kind of go through the ordinary process because they're trying to set an example that other people can follow. And so he, of course, had gurus. Jesus had John the Baptist, for example, and so they go through various processes which look like they are learning from a particular guru, and indeed those particular gurus awaken certain aspects within them as well. Sri Ramakrishna wanted to realize God in all possible aspects, and so he took on a variety of teachers and coaches, you could say, in order to do that. We do have those examples. Now, with the Holy Mother, Sri Ramakrishna was basically her only teacher. She didn't have to have any other teachers. And we know Sri Ramakrishna had realizations before he had any teachers. So it wasn't like he had to have teachers to have realizations, but he took them on in order to have a completely well-rounded, universal approach to his ministry. If, however, you should not send a boy to school, if you should not have him read books, people would think you mad, because we are ordinary mortals. Whereas an incarnation is absolutely independent. He looks to no one for help. For this reason, people at first think him insane, but when they realize his greatness, they come and sit at his feet. Every incarnation has his friends and his enemies, but his friends far supersede his enemies. And of course, we also see in Sri Ramakrishna that while he took on the role of the priest at the Kali temple, there were many times when his worship seemed rather unorthodox to some of the more orthodox people associated with the temple. And thank goodness that Matra Babu recognized his specialty, that he was a supreme being, and allowed him to be who he was, and deflected all of the people that were criticizing him for not following absolutely every little detail of rituals all the time. He certainly did it some of the time, but there were many times when he would be in such an ecstatic state that the strict rules of how one did worship were not necessary. He had already achieved the union of himself with the chosen ideal and the object being worshipped, namely Mother Kali. So there wasn't the need to go through every detailed step of the puja. And of course, as said, some people didn't understand that because they didn't see Sri Ramakrishna's greatness, but Macha Babu did. And so did the Rani Rashmani. And of course, we know that Sri Ramakrishna didn't have to go to school. But he did listen to pundits. He did listen to people talking about the scriptures, and he just absorbed everything instantly. The same kind of thing with Swami Vivekananda. He didn't have to hear anything more than once before it was completely absorbed, because when you already know something intuitively inside, once the words are put there, then it becomes perfectly clear, and you don't have to struggle over it like we do, where we read something in a book, and then we have to sort of think about it, and then we have to sort of puzzle about it, and then maybe we'll do some experiments. Maybe we'll read somebody else's explanation of the same thing because we didn't quite get it. we go on, and finally we kind of think we understand it. But deep down inside, they've already understood these things before they've ever heard them read. And so as soon as they've heard them read, then they've got the words to put with it. After what you have heard just now, it will be easy for you to distinguish an incarnation of God from those who are not. As though we're going to run into several in the street corner or something. I guess historically he's talking about all men may be classified under four heads. First, ordinary men of the world. Second, siddhas, who are not born perfect, but struggle and realize their perfect nature afterwards, and who are distinguished from an incarnation by this struggle. Then come the nitya siddhas, who always accompany the incarnation, just as fragrance always accompanies the flower, or as rays accompany the sun. An incarnation is always independent. He never struggles to realize the truth. Illumination comes to him from within, without any effort. Sometimes he seems to struggle for realization, but that is intended to teach men how to follow the path leading to perfection. He comes down here to guide his erring children, and hence should have to be to guide his erring children, and hence should have to behave in such a way as to set a good example to them. And we know that when both the Bhairavi Brahmani and Totapuri came to teach him things that would take other people weeks or months to master, as soon as he was told what to do, he mastered it. So it wasn't like he was having to learn these things from the guru. They were simply kind of lighting that lamp a little bit to make it come forth. All right, so that ends that chapter. Now he's going to go through the different avatars of Vishnu that we don't usually talk about very much, and so these are kind of interesting. There's these Puranic stories, and this first one is, of course, going to remind us a lot of Noah's Ark. It's interesting that the story that's similar to Noah's Ark seems to appear in cultures all over the world. So here's the Indian version. The Matsya Avatar. Whenever God comes in the flesh to remedy the evils of the world, we call him an Avatara. He comes the first time in the form of a fish, Matsya. Why? Because that was the only form that would suit him. For at that time there was a great deluge. The whole world was covered with water, And as man would be very weak in water and unable to do much in order to do good, he had to take the form of a fish. This was the way it came. People had all taken to false paths. They were committing all sorts of blunders. They were so very perverse that even if a good man went to them and said, "My dear friend, do not take to that path. This is the right path," they would not even care to listen. Suppose a boy is doing wrong, and you go to him and say, "Please don't do that." If he does not listen to you, then you say, if you do not do that, I will give you some sweetmeat. Then you find that somebody is encouraging him, and you try to separate him from that other person. At last, if he will not hear you at all, you deal with him some blows. This is what our scriptures tell us. And of course, any of us that have ever been in the teaching profession know that there are students that just never seem to listen. Doesn't matter what you say, they won't do what you tell them. This is what our scriptures tell us. First, sama, conciliation. Second, dana, concession. Third, beta, division. And fourth, coercion. That is, first try sweet words, then some sort of concession, then division, and if that does not succeed, then beat him. We won't let the people in the school system know that.
They already know.
Yeah. In those days, people were so very perverse that sweet words had no effect, and they were all so equally perverse that no one could divide them. So, the last resource was to punish them by taking away that wicked nature, such as the doctor wishes to take the feverish nature out of a patient by giving him bitter medicine. God is the greatest doctor in the whole world. So when he finds his children are all going wrong, he wishes to remove their evil nature. To do it at that time, he had to take away their bodies and minds, because with such wicked bodies and minds, they could not be happy. He intended therefore to destroy all such perverse people by a deluge. But there was one family that was very pious and had never gone astray. That good man went by the name of Manu. Manu, his children and grandchildren were all good, and they were all going along paths that would lead them to salvation. So God wanted to protect this family because they had not a perverse nature to be taken away. What did he do? Well, one night when Manu was performing his sandhya or devotions, he found in his pot a little fish. When he had finished his sandhya, he saw that it had grown so large that it was almost as big as the vessel. So he put it in the tank. The next morning, it was as big as the tank, and it asked to be taken to a larger place, for this fish could talk. So some of the children carried it to the river. Then the river became too small, and it asked to be taken to the sea. Then it was put into the sea, and it said to Manu, "There is to be a great rainfall, so you and your children build a ship for yourself, and put into it also a pair of all the different living beings on the earth." This Manu did. As soon as he had filled his ship with pairs of all living creatures, it began to rain, and it rained, and it rained, until all the land was covered and everything was destroyed, except Manu and those in the ship. The fish had warned Manu that there would be terrible hurricanes, and told them that in order to hold his ship steady and save it, he would better tie it to its tusks or horns, for this was a very unusual fish, and it had tusks and horns above its nose. Then, when all the perverse people were destroyed, the rain ceased. The waters gradually dried up, and Manu with his family came out of the ship. God had to come in the form of the fish because the land was going to be flooded, and no other form could have been of any use to him. But do not think that as a fish, that he had a fish's brain. The fish body was only a coat. It was a wise man in a fish's body. The dress may vary. You may use one kind of dress at one time and another kind at another time, but still you are always the same person. So God is the same God whether he takes the form of a fish or any other form. At that time, the fish's form was the one that best suited his purpose. So he came as a fish. This clearly shows his infinite love towards all children. We are apt to think that it was very hard for God to kill so many people, but actually he did not kill anyone. He merely took away from his children that which kept them from being happy. If you have an old torn cloth full of germs of disease, and if someone makes you give it up and offer you a new one, do not feel that he has done you harm. So God only took away those bad clothes, as it were, in order to give them better ones. But you may say, when he destroyed a man's body, we are looked upon as the worst kind of people. When we destroy a man's body, we are looked upon as the worst kind of people. Well, this is because we can only destroy, while we cannot give another body. God, however, can give something in its place of what he takes away. He merely does away with an old cloth in order to give a new one. When we take life, we are like highwaymen who strip a man of everything and leave him with nothing. Such a robber is blamable. But suppose a man comes to you and asks how much money you have and how many you have to support. Then he sees that your cloth is ragged and dirty, and so he does away with it to give you a fresh one and offers you some money, saying, "What you have is not enough for you. Take these." Is he like a robber? No. He deprives you of a little in order to give you more. So God, because he loves us so dearly, takes away a small thing to give us a greater thing. And so again, of course, what he's saying is that if you've in a bad body and situation, that the death of the body is not a bad thing, because you're going to get to be reincarnated in a better situation so that you can learn new lessons. But the similarities with the Noah story are striking. And as we mentioned, there's stories like that in all over the world. Now, a lot of people thought it was due to perhaps the Strait of Gibraltar having been blocked up, and that the Mediterranean Sea was dry, and then that block broke and the Mediterranean Sea flooded. And other people think it's the where the Black Sea enters the Mediterranean, that was blocked and then that broke. So there are all these theories as to why there are flood stories in Europe, but that doesn't explain why there are flood stories in India, and flood stories in the Americas, and flood stories in other parts of the world. So it's simply that there seems to be a mythological truth that things get wiped out every once in a while in order that they can get started over again. Sometimes if you're doing artwork, you've worked away, and it just seems to be becoming worse instead of better. So you toss it out and start over again. Sometimes you can fix it up and you make it a little better. I certainly found that in writing music. Every once in a while, I write something, and it's not that great, so I make a few changes and it gets a little better, and then you make a few more changes and it gets a little better. And other times I write something and there's nothing I can do to it. I just have to start over again and throw it out and start over. So it's like that. And it's interesting, there seems to be more and more archaeological evidence of civilizations that we had not known of previously, and we still don't know much about them, but there's just these tiny bits of evidence that there seem to have been humanoid people that lived in civilizations previous to the ones that we are usually familiar with. And so who knows how they all happen to get wiped away. But somehow those civilizations didn't survive as civilizations. Perhaps remnants of it survived in order to give rise to the humanoids that we are, but who knows. We may never know. There may never be enough evidence because obviously, for example, if there really was a big flood like this, it wipes out most of your evidence. You're not going to find much of it left. So all of these stories just give us an inkling that something must have happened, and there's this consciousness of this flood that seems to pervade all of humanity in its mythological lore. All right, well, that's enough for tonight. We haven't quite finished this fish tale. This is a pretty big fish tale, right? All heard about people telling big stories about their fish. This probably takes the cake. Yeah. Ah, right.
Are you familiar with the story of the Dogon tribe?
Yeah, they have a similar story, don't they? Yeah.
Some kind of alien came down.
Yeah.
Came into the water in the shape of a dolphin, a figure of a dolphin.
Yeah.
They wrote stories upon stories.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Also, the melting of the ice ages.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that would
times,
flood things.
Flooded from the
Right. Right.
Antarctic.
Yeah, and sometimes these events happen rapidly if you get a lot of methane suddenly going into the atmosphere, or carbon dioxide from volcanic vents and places, and that warms the temperature up. If you get a lot of dust in the atmosphere, it cools the temperature way down. So, when you look at the geological history, we're in a Goldilocks zone. It is almost never like this. If you look at the last 4.5 billion years, it is almost never like this. It's almost always a lot hotter or a lot colder. We kind of bump back and forth between snowball Earth and tropics all over the place. So, all right. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Filled with Brahman are the things we see. Filled with Brahman are the things we see not. From out of Brahman floweth all that is. From Brahman all, yet is it still the same. Om, peace, peace, peace. Well, nice to have you all.